Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this week's webcast, Professionally Evil webcast. Today we're going to mainly be hearing from Mick. I'll be joining in every once in a while with some other thoughts as he's going through, but Mick is one of our senior security consultants, and when he's not doing that, he moonlights as probably our primary dev right now too. So he has a good breadth of knowledge, not only from when we're talking about testing applications and systems, but also just the whole idea of what it's like to integrate security within development processes on their own. So with that, Mick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Let's get started. So we're going to jump right in here and just start talking about stuff. We'll explain in a minute how big this topic is and how much I shaved off to try to fit it into something that is worthwhile within an hour. But I'm going to start with an anecdote. Should only take a minute. If you happen to be here because you saw the blog that we posted a couple of weeks back, it'll be familiar because it's pretty much the same anecdote. But I'm going to run through it anyway. So developers like getting stuff done, right? That's good. Developers care whether they are making progress or not and get frustrated when there are things placed in their way that impede that. And so for me, where I kind of first really experienced it is when my first job at a school, I came in and I had done like full product development as an intern. I hobbied as a developer for 10 years before that. So I very quickly got a fair bit of autonomy and responsibility because I could. Despite having actually at one point like messed up the production database in my first week on the job. But
who hasn't done something similar? I mean,
well, it's because I was pointed at a dev environment, but there was one spot where the connection string for the prod was hard coded and they didn't know it was there. Anyway, that beside the point. So I basically had autonomy there. So I owned the entire development flow, right from requirements gathering through to delivery of the tool or whatever I was building. A lot of it was internal tooling for a company dealing with kind of the logistics of getting ads to television and radio. So they did video editing and conversions and compression and all that sort of stuff. And then the actual distribution platform to get it out to the different broadcasters that would be using it. But so I did a lot of internal tooling there, and it was a lot of, I would go to the person who did the job that needed the tool or needed refinements to what they were currently using, shadow them, understand what they're working with, talk about their frustrations or their pain points, go back, design and implement a solution, bring it back to them, have them try it out, get a little bit of feedback, maybe do another iteration. Then I was done and move on to the next one and the next one. And there was very little friction in that. It was efficient. And I just had, freedom to do what I needed to, use the tools, whatever I wanted to, that sort of thing. And then the next job that I worked immediately after that was integration consulting in a major bank.
There's no process there. There's no process at all.
Yeah. So Eric knows a bit about process in the bank. Eric might be responsible for some process in banks. Right. But so suddenly it was like, well, we want you to use something in the Rational, I think, tool suite. We want you to install this. Like, okay. And so this approval process goes on for a few weeks. It finally gets approved so I can install it, which I didn't want it in the first place, but I had to. And then there's this process for actually doing the installation that involves, virtual hosted disks and actually swapping multiple virtual disks in order to complete the installation and licensing this thing. And that entire flow, I think it was like 3 days of just, that's all I did was install a piece of software that I was required to use. Inefficiencies like that, massively frustrating when you're actually trying to get stuff working and you can't. Change management was frustrating as well. It was a lot of it's important, right? I think if you're here, you're probably a security person for the most part. You recognize that change management is important, but our particular process there for change management was this. It was this hurdle to do any kind of even lower environments, to do any kind of deployment. We were writing down configuration for WebSphere, taking it over, validating it. If anything was wrong, we had to restart the entire process. If anything was not, perfectly aligned with their documentation. And so it was a ton of back and forth that way. Everything we did, I guess, to kind of wrap it up, everything we did was just dragged down in this bureaucratic process. And it was frustrating. And I was, that particular project, because it was a consultancy, this project that I worked on went 2.5 years with me on it. Sometimes we had status meetings twice a day that were each an hour. It was quite a shift for me. And how I think that relates to when we start putting, requiring security of developers, so we create a lot of the same frustrations because come in as an outsider, right? We're not part of that team. And we dictate, you need to do this. You need to change this. Your app is bad because of this. And those things need to happen. But at the same time, I think we encounter more resistance than we need to. And the developers they're being frustrated because they're being forced to go through the process, but they are not invested in the process.
And just to add just a little bit, well, Mick is definitely highlighting developers. I think anybody who works on the operational side, whether that is an infrastructure person or anything, has the same type of general feeling in most organizations. Not necessarily everyone, but I think it's common, right? Where it feels like we got to do this because we're being told to do this. And it's just taking me all this extra time and effort and everything. And all I want to do is build this beautiful thing for the company to have, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing, not all of this other stuff.
Yeah. It's like every time you go to work, it feels like you're showing up at the DMV to.
All right, let's move on. let's not relate jobs to DMV necessarily, waiting in line. So.
All right. So let's move forward. So I started. I had this idea for today's webinar, and then I started outlining the things I wanted to talk about. And this was the first draft. This doesn't even have everything on it that I probably would have added. This was my first draft of all the things, just to outline the conversation. Obviously, this is way too much. We're not going to do a lot of these today. So this doesn't even dig into some of the things. So, software maturity models, the, frameworks you can use to make sure you're implementing all the correct controls and validating them properly and all that sort of stuff. There's a ton here. We could easily spend an entire day on this. For today, that looks like I took about half of it out of there. I think I actually took a lot more than half because the other ones were not expanded as much as they would have been. But we're going to kind of hit on a handful of things here, mostly focused around the concept of engaging developers in the process, getting them invested in the process, but also making it not feel like this onerous overhead to them. Instead, make it kind of an intrinsic part of the way they work. So a lot of focus on culture, on getting people excited about and talking about security in their role as developers on a daily basis. And yeah, let's just press on. All right. So we kind of hit on this already a bit. So there's this disconnect where you got security people coming in from the outside and saying, these are things you need to do. This is process you need to have. These are things you need to change. And developers can be a bit like artists at times, in that you start picking at stuff, you're going to get an emotional response to a certain extent. People get defensive of their work. And particularly when they're being criticized by their work is being criticized by somebody that doesn't do that kind of work, somebody that doesn't build it. It's kind of like a film critic criticizing a film. Well, they're not a filmmaker, right? They couldn't do that, but they're going to come in and
tell me what's wrong.
Yeah, start telling you what's wrong with yours and what you should have done differently. And so that aspect of it, I think we've talked about a bit. We didn't really completely expand on. So this concept of a culture shift, and how security can be a task, or security could also be a culture in the organization. And tasks are these annoying things that are in your way, things that you have to do. They're like chores. Culture is more intrinsic. It's not a separate thing that you think about or separately need to do. And it tends to spread within the organization. Sometimes, depending on the type of culture, that could be a positive or a negative thing, but it tends to grow from people to other people to kind of permeate the structure of the organization. And so we'll dig into that some more too. But this disconnect, I think, is kind of the biggest thing that what we're talking about today is strategizing to address. Okay. So obviously, what I'm going to propose is a one-size-fits-all solution that will work for every organization.
Absolutely. Everybody can do this right off the bat as soon as we're done here.
So and this came from when I was expanding it out, but we'll touch on a couple of different types of organizations. So I made up some fictional organizations. They have different characteristics, and we'll talk about how those characteristics might impact how they approach, spreading security throughout their development groups. What might make sense for one versus another, and that sort of thing. These two fictional organizations, we'll just hop ahead to them, I guess. They're at different spots, on sort of a scale. A lot of organizations aren't exactly like one of these or the other. They're somewhere in between, or in some cases could be completely off to the side, someplace kind of dissimilar to these. But I think these will look pretty typical to a lot of people for what a lot of organizations do look like. So the first one I call the agency. So it is a company that does projects for other companies. I guess is one of its key things. It's got a sort of startup-like culture. They're trying to maintain, even though they're 250 seats at this point, which basically means they order in pizza on Wednesdays. They've got development teams, lots of them, lots of development teams, lots of development staff doing these projects for clients. So a lot of these projects are greenfield pretty regularly. Team sizes I have here 3 to 6. So fairly small, but dynamic teams. And then people get shifted around. These teams are not very static at all. They'll complete a project, and then some people will go to a different project from the others. And we're talking fairly short projects. My example of a long one here is 3 months. What else? I gave them a dedicated QA team. I don't think that's actually going to factor into any of our discussions today. QA definitely is a good business unit to also loop into the security process, but today I'm not really going to be talking about them. And in this case, because they're keeping that startup-like culture and the many hats sort of situation, they don't have dedicated security staff. So security responsibilities are handled by administrators, people that have other technical leadership roles. So for this one, one example, one thought here that might stand out, if you're familiar with the role of a application security engineer, this seems like a good candidate to have one or two of those. If you're not familiar with it, they do kind of a breadth of different things. So they'll often be involved in setting up automated tooling for SAST and DAST. They'll be involved in educating developers and helping the security education program for the developers. And they'll often also do some penetration testing type work. So that's kind of loosely where they fit in. In this organization, that might make sense. The other thing that this organization would benefit from is the fact that they've got these greenfield projects they can go and try out at a fairly small scale with a fairly small time investment, new security conscious sorts of approaches, figure out what they like, what works for them, and then the members of that team then end up on other teams sharing that knowledge. So there are a handful of things in this kind of organization where that it sort of helps them out, just their nature. This doesn't mean there aren't drawbacks as well,
though. What would you say, in an organization like this, would you say that they would have a problem with security right off the bat, or do you think that they'd have this general idea, or how would an org who's in this area start thinking about it if they don't have either of those two positions? Like, is that a huge problem? We're writing bad code everywhere, or do you think it dynamically just kind of grows before we talk about other things?
Yeah, so there's probably a lack of oversight, and unless they have developer security training because they have to, for example, if they're dealing with e-commerce applications where they have PCI compliance, in that case, they're probably being trained on security. Otherwise, they're probably not. So even your junior intermediate developer pushes some code, does a pull request. Your team lead or architect for the team looks at it and goes, "Yeah, it looks good," because they don't know any better. This doesn't mean, they're often fairly smart people, but they're fairly smart people in a hurry that don't have expertise in security.
Okay.
And so we're going to talk right after we go through these organizations. We'll start talking about the idea of peer-led initiatives to kind of build the knowledge internally where it doesn't exist in the organization yet. And a lot of those strategies will apply to the agency. All right, let's look at the next one. So, and we're only I'm only going to touch on the two here. So my other one here is the monolith. So this may look a little bit like a bank in some ways. I think the key parts here are there's a lot less mobility and more siloing between the developers, and software development is not their business, right? Their development teams do things for internal and possibly client or customer facing systems that help the business, but the software itself is not their business. And so the lack of mobility is an issue here. There's probably a lot less knowledge, like cross-pollination between the developers in this case. One thing that might actually work in their favor is if there's more formalized structure around meeting, particularly between leads, between teams. That's something that could be leveraged. They probably don't have greenfield projects very often. So in their case, they're going to be having to try to retrofit it into an existing project, which is more challenging.
And in this case, going back to your previous anecdote, there's also the problem of there's all of these potential existing processes that are supposed to be adding security, but may not be being followed perfectly. How's that?
Yeah.
Is that a good way of putting it?
So one of the best parts that I didn't hit on in that anecdote, I actually was in the blog post though, was that I saw developers bypassing security controls to get their work done, and like using privilege escalation to get local admin on their machines and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorite. I know people that are still there, so I know it is not still the case. But one of my favorite loopholes there was we couldn't use the Windows registry editor, but we could install the sysinternals one and use that.
Well, you know. And who said you're not a networking OS guy there, Mick? Come on.
I'll try a different tool. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean that's a good point. So there often are security policies in place where there's not a lot of either they're not effective because they're not being enforced, not effective because they're not being followed, not effective because they were bad policies in the first place. There are a lot of reasons why they can be ineffective. But yeah, but they're in the way, and they're creating this adversarial relationship already between security and development, which is going to make, if leadership comes and says we're gonna beef up our security program, you're gonna get eye rolls from people not wanting more impediments to their work when they're already seeing it as not beneficial. So, yeah.
Clearly, like you said before, there's all these other types that aren't there, but these are two good examples to start with.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we may reference back to these two, I guess, archetypes a little bit in some of the further parts of the discussion. But yeah, they're fairly common organization structures. There are plenty of others. I mean, your typical startup is quite a bit different. I don't think the monolith perfectly represents some of the like large financial organizations. The healthcare probably doesn't quite fit either. But yeah. All right. Well, let's not linger on these. So culture matters. And I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. Culture is this intrinsic thing. So the culture, and I'm specifically talking about the culture of the organization. It drives, in my opinion, employee behavior more than written policy does. People tend to mirror what they see other people doing around them. So if it's normal to mark all of the static analysis findings as false positives, if you can't figure them out, that becomes the culture, right? Or a part of the culture around how the development team handles security. And people will see it, and somebody new comes in and they go, oh, I've got all these things and they're holding me up, and somebody will say, oh yeah, just mark those as false positives and you can move on, right? Also pointing to one of those ineffective policies we were just talking about, about being supposed to do the review properly and remediate them. But
and the only thing I have here is, culture matters in the other way too, right? So we're talking about, hey, we want to shift in this way of a positive culture change, but the opposite happens perhaps even faster, right? If you have one or two people who are all dead set against whatever it is, that will often perpetuate throughout an organization much faster than this is a beneficial thing, or we're trying to align, or however you want to present it, right? The negative side for some reason always moves faster than a positive way.
Yeah, it's just part of the human condition. It's the same reason that a lot of traffic farming on online news sites, social media, they focus on the negative because it drives engagement more than positive. Um, but the nice thing about this, on the positive side, um, the culture, it's not just the behaviors themselves. It becomes sort of internalized. It becomes part of the sense of identity for the group. So if you imagine an organization where there's a culture of working hard, strong work ethic, getting things done in a timely manner, and being proud of the fact that they get that done, that they solve the hard problems, that they keep things moving. Um, that becomes a point of pride for one thing. That's one of the advantages of it, of just having that sort of cultural integration of it. The other thing is the people that more strongly display that behavior will tend to sort of automatically be viewed as leaders because the identity is focused around it. Now, just like this example was work ethic, security mindedness can be a intrinsic part of the culture, just like that, where our stuff is secure. We take the right steps to develop secure applications. We successfully stop attacks against us. It's a point of pride that people don't get into our customers' data or our partners' data or ours. Mm-hmm. And the people that particularly excel at the security mindedness, that show that cultural value, kind of naturally become leaders within the group.
All right. So how do we start this? How do you start the culture shift in the positive way?
Yeah. So peer-led initiatives are a big one, which we'll just skip ahead here. Whoop, too far. One back. Actually, trying to think if maybe we should have just done that in the opposite order, like I accidentally skipped to. So the advantage of things being peer-led is it solves a lot of those problems we were talking about with security, the nebulous, Sith lords on the outside telling you what you can and can't do. Instead you end up with insiders. You've got the cultural shift is being driven by people that are already in the department, people that work alongside your other developers, that do what they do, that understand the pain points that things cause when there are changes, and can draw on their experiences for how to smooth that sort of thing out. And then what happens is it becomes more discussing and sharing within a group of peers, rather than somebody on the outside coming out and telling them what they have to do. Now, that's not to discount the need for support from the top, and for that support to be visible as well. So I'm going to skip ahead. So the idea of a security champions program isn't new. It's a lot of people have talked about it. A lot of people have heard about it. Lots of organizations have them. But I'm going to use slightly different terminology here because I want to separate things a little bit more. So what I've done here in that development column there, I've got my section of captains. I've got deputies. Now, I've kind of separated them by rank within the department. Architects, not necessarily higher than dev leads. It's just a different role. Depends on the organization. So some architects might be suitable captains. A lot of your dev leads could be your senior and intermediate devs. The thing that's not captured in the graphic, GIF, graphic.
Yeah.
The thing that's not captured in the graphic is that the people you want to select are the ones that are naturally already excited about security or interested in it, or maybe they don't know a lot about it, but it is something that they want to know more about or want to be involved in, rather than grabbing all your dev leads and going, hey, you guys are now security captains. You're better off looking for volunteers among them, that actually would like to voluntarily take a course or get involved in a group within the organization, to become a kind of a leader in that space for within the group, specifically specializing in security. Now, although I've shoved the junior devs and some of the senior intermediates into the deputies group, where I'm actually drawing that line there is whether you as a, the person trying to drive this, whether you see their peers viewing them as leaders. So not necessarily formally. I mean, some of it can be this person is in a leadership role, but also pay attention to the people that others just naturally come to and look to for advice, even if they're not currently in a leadership role. Those ones are to me would be the captains, and your deputies are the ones that are maybe they don't quite have that relationship with their peers yet, but they do have that interest in security, and it's something they want to learn about and take and share with their teams. Now, I represented the AppSec engineers on this one as well. I shoved them under information security. They can, and in some organizations they're actually under the development group. It's not necessarily siloed like this. That's why it says also dev. But what their role is, I think, in this relationship depends on how they are coupled with the development group. And that's something that can be quite variable. So if they are working alongside the devs most days, if they are basically, if you feel that the devs would perceive them as peers, then your AppSec engineers are also captains, probably. If not, then possibly the people guiding the captains. If they are still more involved in working with the security team, they are involved with the devs sometimes, but would be, in your opinion, perceived as an outsider, then I would use them as a resource, for sure. Lean on them. Have them do a lunch and learn, but have one of your devs, one of your captains, introduce them, and kind of facilitate that. And then I put in-house pen testers. So if you have dedicated penetration testers in-house, again, similar to what I just said about sort of your more decoupled AppSec engineers, if you have in-house pen testers, they're a good resource, but they are not internal to the development team. They're not going to be perceived as peers. And so you can use them, but they are not going to lead the culture shift for you.
So how do you get somebody started? You mentioned, hey, we need people to get excited, right? So, and how do you start this idea of captains and deputies and et cetera?
Yeah. Well, you got to get them. You need to identify who is interested in it. And so some of that could just be find an opportunity. Here, let's actually skip 2 ahead here. Starting your AppSec journey. Yeah. So there are different sorts of events you could put on as an organization. There are things you could do, outside the organization. I'm not going to do these in order. Let's start with conference attendance. So there are a lot of information security conferences, a lot of small ones. They're all over the place. At least United States, certainly Ontario as well has a handful. I'm imagining at least most Western countries there, pretty common, pretty widespread. Mm-hmm. Attend them. You're going to lose a day of work to it, but
I was about to say, in some ways this could be like a huge thing for those people who feel they're behind the 8 ball with, I have all these things I have to get done and all this process, and wait, I can go hear about security somewhere else. I can go get a paid day to go to a conference or something.
Yeah. And then, see who is actually interested in doing that. The people that volunteer to do it probably are interested in security. I would suggest maybe making a requirement that they also have to come back and share something that they learned.
You're not going to let
But
them get away with the, I said I'm going to go to Orlando for this conference, and instead I just went and played golf.
I don't know who would do that. Maybe it's because I like conferences better than golf.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, a lot of these are very inexpensive in terms of an actual ticket to attend. Some are free. Some are, less than $20. So if there was one nearby, for example, if you were in Grand Rapids today, you might not be here. You might be at GurCon.
If you're here and not at GurCon, thank you for joining us, but you should go back to GurCon. No, stay here.
If you're in Grand Rapids, you should probably be at GurCon. But yeah, so, having people go to a conference that is driving distance away, especially if it's not one that requires overnight accommodations, to me would be a no-brainer. They're going to go in, they're going to listen to a bunch of talks. Some will be good, some will be possibly not, depends on the conference. It's fine. But they'll also be immersed in this security culture. And it's a fairly open one. They'll have conversations with people. Just because you strike up conversations. It's strange. On average, we are probably one of the most introverted industries. But if you go to these conferences, people strike up conversations with each other all the time, even the quiet ones. So,
and so there's. I was going to say beyond GurCon and perhaps slightly larger named ones, there's the smaller organizations in almost every city are close by. B-Sides, huge. Other chapters are quite often promoting those conferences or attending, whether that's OWASP or others, etc. Right? So, tons of opportunity, conferences or independent groups out there.
Yeah. I mean, you could have a watch party for like the global OWASP AppSec conferences as well.
There you go.
If you're forcing your employees to go to a physical office space, then use a conference room for it, obviously. But, I would say put them in one place and provide food. But providing food is always a good plan. That really applies to checking. Yeah, all of these. All of these should provide food. The movie night one, so that probably seems like an odd one because your developer is not going to get a lot better at security by watching Hackers or Sneakers. It's an unpopular opinion, but I actually think Sneakers is the better film.
I'm 100% with you. So 100% of the presenters agree that Sneakers is better than Hackers. So there you go.
We're gonna get fired for that. So here's where I think there is a value, right? You're trying to create a culture shift. You're trying to get people excited and interested in thinking about security. They're not going to learn a lot about securing things from these movies, but they do lean into this sort of it's almost like a fantasy, right? If I'm at an event, not a security or technology event, but just a general meet and greet someplace, and I meet somebody and they ask what I do, and I explain, I hack into applications and networks with permission and help people find the vulnerabilities. People like that. People respond positively to it. And say, wow, that sounds like a really cool job. It's not. It's a lot of report writing, but people think it sounds really cool. So lean into that sort of with some guardrails, right? People need to understand, okay, just because we're watching Hackers does not mean you should go and attack the company infrastructure. Doesn't mean you should be attacking other things on the internet that you don't have permission to. But lean in a little bit to that kind of, what's that, romanticized in a way, hacker culture to sort of drive interest. Book club's a good one. I told you we were going to do these out of order. So, have people read a book. Hey, right? Fund it. Buy them the book. Don't make people buy their own books, but have people read a book, the same one, then get together and talk about it. It's even better if it's a book they can actually put some of the work from into practice in some way. If you don't know what book, I recommend, it's not going to focus on that because I've got the blur on. So
it says threat modeling. There you go.
It does. Did I fix it? Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Sort of. Yeah. Right. So the threat modeling book, Designing for Security, is widely pressed. Written by Adam Shostak. Really good book for developers. And so I actually first encountered this because a client did exactly this. They had everybody come together and read this book and discuss it and figure out what they were going to do. They were starting up their application security program in this established organization. They had a greenfields project. They were putting the threat modeling into practice. They were using the Microsoft secure development lifecycle to kind of guide things as well. And my role in this as a consultant that was brought in was to talk to them about what they were doing and evaluate it and then test the app. And they performed very well throughout the process. And so I got this book. It's like, you guys read this book. I'm going to read this book. This is a good book. And it is. It is. I don't have any relationship to the author. It's a good book. I recommend it. Then lunch and learns. I think everyone's pretty familiar with those. Don't do boring topics for lunch and learns. All right. You try to drive interest. Do topics that are interesting. Don't do, hey, look, let's do a parameterized query to show how SQL injection can be prevented. That's going to be boring. Show a cool hack. Use SQL map to dump a database through a timing flaw if you're going to do a SQL injection one.
They call lunch. Check.
Yeah. Well, maybe you run it in advance and speed it up. Yeah. Let's move forward. The point, and this is beyond the peer-led one. So all of these are things that your captains, you're right. They've expressed their interest. You provide learning opportunities for them to learn together, to share knowledge together. Steel sharpen steel, and then share it with the rest of their teams. And it's coming from within, right? And that's a key part of it. One thing I didn't really mention there, and I sort of said it earlier, but I want to reiterate quickly. Leadership needs to be seen as supporting it, though. Like where I'm talking, your directors or C-suite or whoever is above the development group, they still need to be seen as promoting it. They just can't be the ones driving it. Right? But it should be clear to the developers that your captains have a mandate to, they have the support of the management to push this thing forward. All right. Making app security fun, because app security can be fun. So an interview response, is a job interview response from years ago, but I remember getting a really positive reaction off of it, which stood out, and it was a genuine answer. I forget exactly what the question was. Something about what my favorite part of the job was in my previous work, and the answer was it's when you have a problem, and so you get a group of people, 3 or 4 smart engineers standing around a whiteboard working out this problem and its solution collaboratively. That there's a feeling there, and it's hard to describe, but it's very rewarding. And so I think pulling people together for threat modeling in that similar kind of collaborative atmosphere, have developers get together and do it, have them look at their own apps, have them look at each other's apps. This is a case where you can pull in some of those outside resources, your incident response people, if you want, your definitely your application security engineers, but go through this together, encourage people to speak up and engage, and do it. And it can be, you'll get positive things out of it, but you can also drive a lot of engagement through that sort of collaborative exercise because it feels good to collaborate. We got tabletop exercises here. This is one I am going to turn over to Eric because he's the one who runs pretty much all of them for two reasons, really. So one, Eric has a ton, like crap ton of infrastructure experience, management, defending, deploying infrastructure. Did I say crap ton? Sorry, I'm sorry for using the metric system.
We're still not explicit. You're fine. You're fine.
Yeah, no, I was concerned because I used a metric unit of measurement there, but I guess
okay.
both kinds of tons. But also because Eric is happens to also be a dungeon master, which makes him.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so no, I mean, I think absolutely tabletop exercises are a great way to get all levels of your organization involved, right? Tabletop exercises are theoretical thoughts that could potentially happen. Hopefully not, most likely won't, but it's always plausible. And even if you think you have the most secure app in the world and the most secure whatever it is, it's just one small hiccup. You run through it and it's just, well, what happens if that one control happens to fail? What do we do? The things that can be learned, from a dev attending and giving their thoughts as to, well, no, we should be able to see that because I know we're logging this somewhere. And then the AppSec team or the infrastructure team or the monitoring team says, well, we're not getting that. So how would we know? You start finding all of these wonderful small places where there's small cracks in your environment, right? And it's the best way of finding it. And not to mention how do we talk to each other? This is an idea of where we can talk collaboratively and in a nice environment where nobody's wrong, right? So you hopefully don't get all of the us versus them because you're all working together on this thing that should never really happen. So it is less us versus them. It's not spy versus spy anymore. Now it's us versus the bad, evil people on the outside, not each other.
Yeah.
So
people forget sometimes that we all have a common goal.
Mm-hmm.
I think security people have historically been a part of the problem there, helping us sort of forget that.
I will say that the one thing that you should do if you're thinking about having a tabletop exercise run for you or you're running one, if you are including developers and others and not just your incident response team or whoever it might be, you want to be sure that the scenario that is there somehow moves into the app realm, right? So that they can be part of it. And it's not just a ransomware runs through your environment, right? Tailor it a little bit so that they have to be introduced, Don't try not to pick on them. Don't make them be the bad people. Devs, you don't want the devs to feel like they're the bad guys because they did something wrong, but have something start occurring in their way, in their area.
Okay, so this is the last one, so we're running out of time anyway. But sharing. So sharing is important, right? We learned about it in kindergarten for a reason. But
I thought that was don't eat paste. Sorry.
Maybe don't eat paste. Also important, actually. I actually have a side story about that, but I don't think we have time. So one thing that we noticed with a longtime secure ideas client, we did a lot of testing for them, several different apps, all maintained by different teams, and we would test an app, find a problem with it, tell them about it. They would go back and they'd fix it. And we'd never see that again on any other app we ever tested for them. Because what was happening, and I think they told us at one point, they'd go back, they'd fix it, and then they would pull together all the other teams and show them what they did and how they fixed it, why it was a problem. So they were sharing this information between the tests, and it really seemed to help them not repeat the same mistakes. And I think it was not just not repeating the same mistakes, but it was we found this here. Let's look for it in our other applications. Do we have that problem? What about you? Yeah. And so they were working together by sharing information to make the organization more secure, to make all of their applications more secure. And in a way, they were multiplying the value for their pen tests by doing it that way as well. It's a great practice. Sharing information like that is important. Another example here: we do a test for you, or some lesser consultancy does. When we get to the end, whether it's before or after you've got the report, it could be the readout, could be after the fact. If you have developers that have questions, well, why is this a problem? How does this vulnerability work? If that's not explained sufficiently in the report, first of all, we screwed up with the report. Second of all, we are happy to, if they want to go into it in more detail, we're happy to have conversations about that sort of thing. Share what we know, and they may also raise questions of, well, isn't this not an issue because of this other thing? The answer might be yes, it's not an issue because of that other thing. We didn't see that other thing because you disabled it during the test, or allowed us
it's
to
behind the
bypass it.
scenes, right? We physically can't see it because it's not shown to us.
Wasn't detectable to us, but you're right, that does mitigate the issue. So having those conversations and supporting their learning is something like take advantage of, whether it's internal or external. Penetration testers should educate, not in a smug kind of, oh, we know better than you kind of way, but in a, no, let's have a conversation about that and make sure that we have correctly conveyed the information to you kind of way. Yeah.
So if you were going to sum up the one thing here, so we can't say just get involved in security, but if you wanted to summarize, the last 50 some minutes into a quick 30-second soundbite.
All right. So one, culture shifts have to happen from within. They can't be dictated from the outside, which means you need to recruit developers to change the culture within the development group. The right ones to recruit are the ones that want to, the ones that are interested in the security. And if you provide them with the time and the resources, they can teach themselves. They can go learn the information and share it amongst themselves. Once that starts rolling, it will spread throughout the group because culture does that. And then sharing is important. And there's no one size fit all solution. I guess those are the other two kind of key points.
Awesome. Well, let me see. So 5 minutes. Good. You've left some time for any questions that people might have here through chat.
Actually, surprisingly, I shaved off a little bit of time because I ran through this on my own earlier, and it took 57 minutes.
Oh, well, look at that. Now you just take that same idea to that race that you're going to do this weekend, and you shave that time off, and you're good to go.
Bring roller skates.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, I'm going to stop the recording, but we will hang out. I want to thank everybody for joining. Mick here for the webcast on how we can try and expand out, how we can start this process and bring security to be part more in line with AppSec, right? Bring that security into the application side. But once again, not focused, the focus was on devs. It really can be any group out there in IT, the same general idea.